What we ask for all of you is we're going to keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation just to preserve sound quality, and we will open up to Q&A towards the end. If you have any questions or thoughts as we go through the presentation, please send them through the chat box function, and we'll start collecting them, and then we'll open up to Q&A and start reading those from the top. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with a very brief overview of IRIS Plus. As most of you may know, IRIS Plus was launched in May of last year, and it represented a significant evolution from the IRIS catalog metrics that the GIIN has managed for the last 10 years. IRIS Plus is a system that helps investors measure, manage, and optimize their impact. So the evolution and the launch from IRIS to IRIS Plus really represented this big transition from a catalog to a system. And what IRIS Plus does is that it gives you a pathway to translate your goals into results. And what this pathway does is that it goes from helping set up your goals in a common way, either by SDG or by common impact themes, such as financial inclusion or education, sustainable forestry, let's say. It also gives you a built-in evidence base and research that can help inform your theory of change or anticipate expected impact. It provides you with core metric sets to help measure progress towards your goals. So while it still continues to have, of course, the catalog of metrics, the core metric sets are just a short list of key indicators for specific strategies and goals that investors have. And it also has practical guidance and resources to help improve IMM practice. And this is what we're going to be zooming in today. IRIS Plus is in alignment also with 50 plus frameworks and tools and standards, including the SDGs, HIPSO, the 2X challenge, the 5 dimensions of impact and whatnot. And what I wanted to show also is what do we have already coverage of in IRIS Plus, and what is coverage that is coming up as the development of IRIS Plus is an ongoing process. So what you see here on the screen on the top box are the themes that we have available in IRIS Plus. I want to make a special mention to the ones you see on bold here, which are education, sustainable forestry, and sustainable water management. These were launched in IRIS Plus last week, so these are brand new, and we're very excited to have them on. We want to also mention a special thank you to the partners that worked with us on those, FHI Ventures and FHI 360 for education, WRI for sustainable forestry, and Conservation International for sustainable water management. And we also have WASH coming up soon. We're working with Water Equity and Water.org. What this means, so the themes that we have there, when we have them on IRIS Plus, it means that we have the built-in evidence base, the core metric sets, and the suggested resources for each of these. And for other themes that we don't yet have these, we continue to have the catalog of metrics. So this is what we have brand new, and more is coming. We're also launching quality jobs and climate mitigation in the next month or so, more on that later. And briefly, since IRIS Plus is quite new, still it's under a year old, even though it builds on 10 years of IRIS, people often ask us, who's using it, where are they? So we thought we would share a little bit of that. To date, we have over 7,000 unique users, representing about 5,000 organizations. And when we look at where are they across the globe, we see that we have all continents represented on their visitors, with higher concentration around America and Europe, these being mostly people where they are based, not necessarily where their activity is, right? So a lot of these are investors who are active in the global south, but their offices might be in the global north. Stakeholders are using IRIS Plus in different ways, and we'll go through this also and with an example today with the PCV team. Some investors are using it to communicate with their asset owners and finding a really common way to be able to align to or respond to requests for proposals in terms of how their proposal will align to the SDGs and the 5 dimensions of impact, and how it's in alignment with data standards, which is IRIS Plus. Others have said that really what IRIS Plus helps them do is that it does the homework for them, because it gives you in one place the core metric sets, the evidence base, and the research, and it saves a lot of time. And others, for example, have said also that it helped them shift the focus going from outputs to outcomes. So there are a lot of different ways in which IRIS Plus can be used, or is being used by investors and enterprises and service providers. And we're going to learn more about that today. What we're focusing on today is on a specific element of IRIS Plus, which is guidance. So guidance is one of the key features of IRIS Plus that we provide to help advance IMM practice. These are practical resources that cover specific areas of IMM that we develop on an ongoing basis to cover areas that we identify as of need based on what the market says. There are three different types of guidance. One is what is called, or what we call, the fundamentals. These are the basics that you need to understand how IRIS Plus works. So for example, what's included in the IRIS Plus thematic taxonomy. This would be, for example, what's included in financial inclusion or in education and what's not included in each of these themes. How, what are our core metrics set, how IRIS Plus relates to the SDGs and whatnot. We also have use cases. We have the first use case that we're going to publish hopefully next month with Naveen, showing very practical example of how an investor uses IRIS Plus along the investment cycle. And then we have what we call the how-tos, which are very practical pieces to help show how IRIS Plus can be used for different steps of the investment cycle. And what we're talking about today with PCV is how to use IRIS Plus for impact due diligence. You can see here on the right-hand side a little screenshot of the cover of our guidance piece. This was published last week and is now available on the IRIS Plus site. So we're very excited to be joining forces with PCV to talk about impact due diligence and how IRIS Plus can help with it. PCV has done quite a lot of work on impact due diligence, providing resources to the market that are public goods in the last couple of years. And so with this, I'm going to hand it off to Tom and Daniel, who will tell us more about impact due diligence. But wait, give me a second, Tom and Daniel, because you are muted and I need to unmute you. Tom, you're unmuted.
All right. Well, thanks, Leticia, for the introduction, and good to be with you all today. As Leticia mentioned, I'm Tom Welfel. I'm with Pacific Community Ventures, or PCV for short. We're a community development financial institution based in Oakland, California, also known as a CDFI. However, we're a little different than your typical CDFI in that we have a research and consulting practice that's focused on supporting the growth and effectiveness of impact investing. And so much of our consulting and research focuses on supporting impact investors in developing and implementing their impact measurement and management approaches. And so in terms of how we came to the research on impact due diligence, one of the things we observed in the market with respect to the conversations that were taking place around IMM, as well as in our own consulting work with clients, was that most of the focus around impact measurement management tended to be after investors had deployed capital or made an investment. And so we really saw a bit of a missed opportunity in the market where the tools of IMM could potentially be applied pre-investment to support impact investors in making more informed investment decisions and being able to, frankly, examine impact in a more systematic fashion. And so kind of with that, we decided to embark on some research a couple of years ago with support from the Heron Foundation Impact Management Project, and then with research support from the GIIN. And we were interested in understanding what were emerging best practices in the market with respect to impact due diligence. And so our research really sought to synthesize what those practices were. And in July of 2019, we published the Impact Due Diligence Guide, which essentially is a how-to for impact investors in engaging in impact due diligence. The guide is quite detailed, and it goes to great lengths to describe both how an impact investor would go about developing their own impact due diligence approach to fit within their existing investment processes, and then how an impact investor would go about implementing that impact due diligence approach and manage it over time, as well as connect it to ex post impact measurement management, or impact measurement management as part of managing your investment portfolio. So that's really how we came to the conversation around impact due diligence, and we've been pleased to be able to share this research with the field in hopes of enabling folks to do more of a systematic examination of impact before committing capital. And so with that, we're excited to be able to discuss with you how IRIS Plus can be used to support impact due diligence, And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Daniel Brett from the Research and Consulting practice to walk us through IRIS Plus and impact due diligence. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
Daniel, okay, there you go.
There we go. Great. So just to start off, so what is impact due diligence? So it really encompasses an assessment of all anticipated impact before an investment is made. And so anticipated impact, that encompasses, looking at the potential investee's historic, current, forecasted impact, as well as looking at the forecasted impact of the investment on the investee's ability to grow and more effectively work towards its mission. So through our research, speaking with a number of investors across the market, working in different geographies and asset classes, we saw there were really three kind of main archetypes of impact due diligence. The first was what we've called narratives of impact, and this is essentially a written description of the anticipated impact. Often this will live inside of an investment memo, and these are kind of consistently assessing impact across all investments. The second archetype we saw were due diligence questionnaires. So these essentially sets of questions that investors consistently use when assessing all of the deals that they look at. Sometimes they're standalone impact-focused DDQs. Other times they're integrated into financially oriented DDQs. And then the third archetype we saw were quantitative tools. So these are tools that have questions within them, but which synthesize qualitative as well as quantitative information about anticipated impact and produce a score which is used to assess the anticipated impact of a deal in relation to an existing portfolio, as well as to compare it to other prospective investment opportunities. I should mention that these three archetypes are not mutually exclusive. We've seen some investors use two or all of these approaches. So why is impact due diligence important? So we've seen a number of reasons, and aligning internally around intended impacts and priorities is a big one. Constructing more impactful portfolios through improved investment selection. A more surprising benefit was that investors have told us that it's helped them to identify ways to add value to help investees achieve more impact. And it's also been used to help them assess and manage impact risk. Just as a quick example, so PCV has developed a quantitative tool for assessing anticipated impact, and it really led our firm to revisit our mission and priorities. It helps us to have more structured conversations about impact during the underwriting process, and that's really helped us to further prioritize our mission, which is to serve minority and women-led enterprises committed to creating quality jobs in vulnerable communities. And there have been a number of sort of concrete results from that. So we've seen that minority-led businesses, on average, tend to have less collateral than white-led businesses. And by developing this tool, it's allowed our firm to take greater financial risk in certain cases where an enterprise is more closely aligned with our mission. We'll jump into how to use IRIS Plus within impact due diligence. So Leticia covered this from the start, but it really begins with identifying impact goals and strategies. So, and this is a key prerequisite to developing a robust impact due diligence approach. So you can identify really specific goals based on your impact theme. And then once you've done that, you can review the evidence base to ensure that your proposed intervention or the types of organizations you seek to support are actually linked to the outcomes that you want to achieve. And you can review the existing research as well as other resources to help refine your impact strategy and approach to measuring and managing your impact.
Right, and so as Daniel was saying, this is where also IRIS Plus comes in the sense of IRIS Plus gives you already these common goals that you can select from and the built-in evidence base. So it does a lot of the work for you. And what you see down here, for those of you not familiar with IRIS Plus, are screenshots of either the selection of goals, what that looks like, and then the evidence base and the research, what that looks like.
Yeah. Thanks, Leticia. So once you've identified impact goals, reviewed the evidence base and relevant resources within IRIS Plus, you can then look at the core metric sets that are associated with your impact goals. And that can directly inform the due diligence questions related to impact that you create. So you create your due diligence questionnaire and you gather data from potential investees. Then you can analyze that data in line with standards. And that can help to inform your investment decisions. So now we're going to jump into an example. And I should note that this is a hypothetical example that we've created to really illustrate how this can work in practice. So we have Impact Invest Global, IIG. This is a newly launched fund manager. They're based in Central Asia. And their starting point is that a recognition that vulnerable communities in Central Asia lack access to affordable, responsible financial services. So from that starting point, IIG then uses IRIS Plus to review its impact objectives, set clear impact goals, choose metrics based on the core metric sets associated with those impact goals, and then using those metrics and a review of the evidence base and relevant resources, they can make impact-focused decisions within the investment, or embed impact more strongly into the investment process. And we're going to walk through kind of each of these steps. So the starting point is they review the IRIS impact theme of financial inclusion and identify improving financial health as their impact goal. The IIG staff then uses the IRIS Plus core metric set for improving financial health to create an impact DDQ and then translate those metrics into questions. They then can begin due diligence on their first potential investee, who we'll call SaveBank. So they're a financial services provider committed to offering savings accounts to the working poor in Central Asia. And they are interested in receiving a $1 million equity investment to expand their reach and further help their customers to build assets, right? So what we're going to do on the following slides is kind of walk through how the core metric sets link to impact due diligence questions. And then we've also included hypothetical investee responses. So you can see on the left column here, these are the sort of the goals and the We've used the 5 dimensions, of course. That's how the IRIS Plus core metric sets are structured. And having coverage across the 5 dimensions is, of course, critical to comprehensively assessing impact. So then we're moving to the questions in the middle column, and then sample investee responses. So when thinking about the what dimension, there's several questions that could be asked. So what is the value of the voluntary savings accounts? What is the projected increase of these savings accounts, and how important is this for stakeholders? So we can see that the current level is 200,000 USD. Projected increase with the investment would be 50% greater, 300,000, and the potential investees telling us that this is actually very important to their customers. Right.
Thank you. And jumping in just to provide a little more context on the core metric sets for those of you who might be on the newer side to IRIS Plus. So each core metric set is centered on one key outcome, which is the one that goes into the goal. So within the what. So you hear the outcome, in this case is increased savings. These outcomes are all backed by evidence. So when we talked before about for example, the built-in evidence base that IRIS Plus has, that's where we have all the academic and field studies that back the connection between specific outcomes and the strategy or the goal that we're looking at. So in this case, we reviewed, so we're looking at investments with the goal to improve financial health, and there is evidence that says that those investments increased savings leads to improving financial health. So that's why this core metric set is anchored on that outcome, which is increased savings, and that's why then the questions that come around, what are the value of voluntary savings accounts are to help measure this specific outcome.
Yeah.
And also, before I pass it back on to you, Daniel, again, what you see here, this table screenshot, this is all based on the guidance note that we wrote together. So this is, when you look at the guidance note, you'll have all of this information and even more detail. This is where all of this is coming from.
Yeah. Thanks, Leticia. I think, yeah, great points about the sort of the evidence base behind supporting these outcomes. If for those who haven't sort of dived into the evidence base that the IRIS team has developed, it's great. There's tons of resources, and I think it will really benefit the field to help ensure that the different strategies and goals are actually linked to evidence to support, so they can actually achieve the outcomes that they want to achieve. So now we're moving to the who. So some sample questions could be, who are the target stakeholders that would benefit from these activities? What are their socioeconomic and demographic characteristics? Where are they located? In this example, the stakeholders are the customers of SaveBank. 80% are low income, 60% are women, and 75% live in rural areas in Central Asia. And then moving to the how much dimension. So, we look at both scale and depth within this dimension in terms of scale. So the investor IAG might ask, how many clients are experiencing increases in the savings accounts, and how big is the increase? Is it significant? And how does the increase compare to overall number of clients? And how much change do clients with savings accounts actually experience? So you can see the potential investee has 5,000 customers. Only 1,000 of those have savings accounts. Presumably the others have different financial products like loans. Of the 1,000, they tell us that about half of them increased the savings account balance in the last year. Only 10% of those had a very marginal increase in the savings accounts. So that then tells us that of the 500, 450 had a significant increase in their savings, and that average savings was about 200 USD in the past year. And they believe that will hold going forward for future customers and current customers. So we've gone through three dimensions pretty quickly. The investor would review the other two dimensions, contribution and risk, as well as other key indicators that are provided by IRIS Plus within the core metric set. We're just going to skip over those today in the interest of time. Okay, so alongside impact due diligence, it's of course important for any investor to engage in your traditional financial due diligence. And IAG concludes that this investment has an acceptable level of financial risk. So now it's time to make their decision. So is the investment sufficiently likely to help improve financial health for marginalized communities, given the financial risks and impact risks? So this is their first potential investment. They're a new fund. They have no data to benchmark this investment against, but they can still assess it based on its own perceived risks and merits. So what are the primary positive anticipated impacts? So, Save Bank is primarily serving marginalized populations that they have a pretty promising track record of working with clients who have, actually used their savings accounts. IAG believes that their investment would significantly increase Save Bank's ability to serve more customers and more effectively serve the customers they do have. So what are the impact risks here? So the investor sees that a pretty high percentage of customers are not actually using their accounts. A segment of them actually closed them, so that's a little bit concerning. So what do they actually do, or what could they do? So IG, in this hypothetical example, ultimately decides that the impact potential is sufficiently aligned with their goals, and they see an opportunity to add value and also reduce impact risk by helping Save Bank to develop a financial literacy pilot to help their customers better understand their finances and what savings can do for them in terms of meeting their long-term financial goals. We switch to the next slide, great. So this process of embedding IRIS Plus into due diligence actually informs ongoing portfolio management. So IIG and Save Bank use some of the IRIS Plus indicators to set impact goals. They don't use them to set, there's not impact goals that are linked to all of the core metric sets. The investor recognizes that might be a little burdensome to set goals against all of them, but they do decide to track all of the IRIS Plus core metrics along the life of the investment to understand impact performance, which of course will inform whether they decide to provide more investments to Save Bank, and that could also inform their strategy going forward. They can test their hypotheses, what's working, what isn't, and that can inform how they assess future deals that are similar, and also help them refine their impact strategy. So wrapping up, so impact due diligence we've seen generates value for investors in a number of ways. The recent GIIN State of IMM Practice report, which came out recently, highlighted that the vast majority of investors believe that using impact data within due diligence is important. I believe this was the most important step of the investment cycle that investors cited in terms of when impact data should be used. So, using IRIS Plus consistently across the investment process is really critical and helpful to help investors and the industry more broadly to ensure that their capital achieves all of their goals, financial and impact related. And we're hopeful that this example, as well as the resources that we're offering, will help investors translate their desire and understanding of this importance to actual practice.
Thank you, Daniel. So just to echo on what Daniel mentioned, last week the GIIN released the second edition of the State of the Impact Measurement Management Practice. You can see the image of the report here on the right-hand side. We did a first round of this report in 2017, and then just again did the second version, collected the data last year and released the report last week. Has a lot of really great insights about how the progresses and the challenges, and I am in practice, so I encourage people to check it out. Also building on what Daniel was saying in terms of the value of using IRIS Plus for due diligence and the ongoing management process is, perhaps we saw the IRIS Plus core metric sets can help inform the due diligence questionnaire, but then most importantly, also help you gather that data in a way that is clear and consistent, and that also leads to comparable data over time. And one thing that we have now in IRIS Plus core metric sets that we didn't have before in the IRIS catalog of metrics is that each core metric set includes specific guidance on how to calculate the specific key indicators or the metrics. So it has a step-by-step telling you whether some metric needs to be disaggregated by, let's say, gender or demographics, or how to report that number, whether it should be a nominal or a percentage or whatnot. So really this effort is for us very important in terms of driving impact performance and making sure that all the data that is enabled by IRIS Plus is clear, is consistent, and can be comparable so that we can better understand the impact performance of impact investors. And so with this, we wanted to, as we said in the beginning, we wanted to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. And so I encourage you all, we're gonna keep you on mute just to preserve audio quality and not have a lot of background noise, but please send your questions through the chat box and we'll start reading them one at a time. I got some direct questions to me already, so I'm gonna start with those, but please feel free to add any other questions that you have. And this is meant to be a space for exchange and learning and sharing. So whether you have a question for the PCV team or for us at IRIS Plus, or whether you have something you want to share, please use this time for that. Before we go also to Q&A, just to highlight what we went through in a very abbreviated version is just what you can find in the how-to guidance piece called Using IRIS Plus for Impact Due Diligence. This is available with all IRIS Plus core metric sets, and I'll go in to the site and show you in a second where exactly you can find it. But this is available in our IRIS Plus core metric sets, and also want to highlight the other two resources that PCV has worked on, which are also public goods, the Impact Due Diligence Emerging Best Practices, and the Impact Due Diligence Guide, which are also available in the Impact Toolkit. So with that, we'll open up to Q&A, and then I'll make sure to go to the IRIS Plus site and show you where to find all of this. But I want to honor your time in making this an interactive session. So I'm going to start with a question here from Jürgen. Hi, Jürgen. It says, this question is for Daniel or Tom. It says, how much additional time did you plan for a due diligence mission to cover the Impact Due Diligence questionnaire? And how did investees take this? Daniel, Tom, I see you're unmuted. Daniel, I can't see your name yet. I'm looking for it. But Tom, would you like to jump in meanwhile and respond?
Yeah, I'll jump in to start, and then Daniel can add on. So hopefully folks can hear me all right. So we do recognize that there's an additional kind of time investment as part of doing a deeper dive around impact as part of conducting due diligence. But frankly, we think that is a bit of a missed opportunity in the field. And interestingly, if you kind of look at the recent State of Impact Measurement Management Practice document, and you see that there's actually data around how much staff time is being allocated to IMM in general, it still feels like the amount of time is maybe lower than you might expect within impact investing. And so we do recognize it on the part of a fund manager or impact staff, there is going to need to be an investment to do a bit of a deeper dive to both develop an impact due diligence questionnaire and then go about kind of asking those questions to investees. In terms of our own work at PCV with the questions that we pose to prospective small business borrowers, we have a pretty big commitment to enhancing job quality as we make a loan to a small business owner to help them grow and invest in employment practices to be more financially successful. And so a lot of the questions that we are asking have kind of a job quality lens as part of the due diligence that we're conducting as part of underwriting. And in general, I'd say that our small business borrowers or prospective small business borrowers have been receptive to those questions, and it's really kind of created a basis for conversation around what our goals are at PCV as part of providing them loan capital and what we hope to be able to achieve together. So in general, from our own experience at PCV, the questions that we've been serving up have been well received by investees. Daniel, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about some of the clients that we've worked with on impact due diligence.
Sure. Well, I just would add that I believe it takes about 20 to 30 minutes for our loan officers to complete to use our quantitative tool to score potential deals. And what they've told us and what others have told us through this research is that organizations who are aligned to the mission of the investor are happy to answer these questions to kind of show where there is alignment. We've seen these approaches most effective at developing relationships with investees when the investor makes it clear from the start that the goal is not just to gather data on them, but to actually help them to look for ways that they can more closely align with their goals. And perhaps the investor has some ideas for ways to do that, rather than sort of just positioning this as a data collection exercise where the enterprise may not see the results of the analysis.
Great, thank you guys. Another question that came in, this one is particularly dear to my heart. It says, what is the role of the stakeholder voice to develop a due diligence questionnaire? How do you engage them? Yeah, so stakeholder voice is really critical. It was one of the 7 emerging best practices that came out of the first phase of our research on impact due diligence, that when investors develop approaches that don't incorporate their key stakeholders, ranging from their investees, the folks that they work with, quote unquote beneficiaries, members of the community where they work, that they are more likely to miss really important impact risks that could pose a challenge to their ability to achieve their goals. So the ability for investors to incorporate a range of stakeholders in the development of these impact due diligence approaches really varies depending on where the investor sits in the market. So, an investor who's far removed from sort of any sort of work on the ground, say a fund of funds, may find it more challenging to actually sort of get inputs from the communities that they ultimately hope to serve, whereas organizations that have stronger relationships or may deploy equity or early stage investments and are working more closely with management teams may have a greater ability to actually engage with and get inputs from folks on the ground who they seek to benefit. Great, thank you. Another question from Julian. It says, how do you address the issue when the impact is not, how do you address the issue when impact intended is not realized on a scale that is fundamental to your mission? How do you course correct at a fund or investment level?
That's a great question. So I think, again, this highlights the importance of integrating impact assessments within due diligence as well as portfolio management. And by having a robust impact due diligence approach, you're able to really test your hypotheses and test your assumptions in ways that that are harder to do when you really only have a robust sort of post-investment impact management system. So what can you actually do? So we've seen a number of investors are sort of deploying subsequent tranches of capital to investees when they have met targets, or as a way to sort of incentivize performance. When impacts are not achieved, then a number of things can happen. An investor can sort of work closely with the enterprise to help them to overcome whatever challenge it might be in terms of staffing, or help them connect to partners who can help them to achieve those goals. But some cases, it's just there's not much that an investor can do. And I think that's it in those instances, and that will potentially inform the investor strategy. Maybe a particular type of enterprise is just not able to achieve the impact goals that the investor believed it would. Maybe they need to invest in larger businesses, smaller ones, or in different industry verticals. But I think it's a way for them to kind of better understand where they can have the greatest impact. And there's not always going to be success stories across the board.
Thanks.
And I'll just add, I mean, I think the key piece here with this question is that your impact due diligence approach has to be linked to your ex post IMM practices. And then together it's falling along your investment process and enabling you to generate learnings, observations that hopefully enable you to adapt to circumstances as they're being realized. So in the question around what do you do when performance is lagging, hopefully based on what you're observing through IMM, you're able to maybe provide some additional technical assistance or think of other tactics that might help improve performance. And in some cases, you may not be able to, but IMM arms you with better information to be able to essentially address those challenges that you're seeing.
That's an excellent point, Tom. Another question that came in, do you use any of the impact expectations to define covenants that complement financial covenants of your financing, or do you think we'll eventually get there?
It's a great question. I'm happy to take this one, and
yeah,
Daniel, maybe you chime in. So at PCV, we do not use kind of specific impact covenants. However, as part of our commitment to quality job creation, as part of the work that we're doing with borrowers, as we're providing them with capital and also advice and mentorship to help them improve job quality over time, we are offering financial incentives that are tied to them hitting particular benchmarks around improvements in job quality over time. So while this isn't a kind of specific impact covenant, it is something that we are serving up to our borrowers and trying to essentially tie improvements in performance to financial rewards. We have seen, I think, overall in the field, though, an interest in financial covenants tied to impact from clients and others. And with, I think, IRIS Plus and a lot of the work that the Impact Management Project and others have been doing to really kind of clarify what we mean by impact and clarify kind of practices around impact, I do think the next step is around financial covenants as well as compensation for fund managers and others to be tied to impact benchmarks.
Yeah. I just would add that I think we've seen some hesitance to use covenants related to impact expectations. Some investors are concerned that it's maybe an overly heavy-handed approach, and that it's maybe more it leads to a more productive relationship if there's sort of very significant rewards, e.g. more capital, if impact targets are reached, rather than sort of using more of a punitive approach of saying that you have to achieve this level of impact or else you're in in default and we're going to collect on our loan to you. So I think there's a little bit concerns around sort of the power dynamic between investors and enterprises, and how that using covenants might reinforce that. But there's definitely interest in using a range of sort of tools to try to, combine both carrots and sticks to achieve impact goals.
Great, excellent points. One more question. Somebody's asking, what do you do if you already have a due diligence questionnaire, but it's not aligned to IRIS Plus? What would you recommend is the best way to make sure that you are aligning to data standards?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So if you already have a DDQ, then what a good approach would be to review IRIS Plus. If you haven't already identified which impact goals are most closely linked to your own organization,
Daniel, we're losing your audio.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, great. So as we covered, before you kind of dive into developing a due diligence approach, it's really valuable to kind of review your goals and strategy, and IRIS Plus is a really useful resource to do that. So first, look at the themes and goals, and take a look at the evidence base to see sort of, is your strategy supported by the evidence base. And from there, you can, assuming that it is, you can update your existing DDQ by looking at the IRIS Plus core metrics and seeing where there might be gaps, and maybe it'll help you ensure you have coverage across the 5 dimensions, and actually help to compare sort of performance across not just your firm, but looking at others that may have similar goals, and using IRIS Plus core metrics to inform their DDQs. So you can kind of update your due diligence questionnaire based on these resources, and I think that's definitely a place to start.
Awesome, thank you. Another question says, of the 2 dimensions that were not covered, which are contribution and risk, how much of your impact risk questions that I'm seeing on your guide, says the person, are aligned with conventional ESG risk questions that many investors are familiar with? So how much of what you look at the impact risk dimension is aligned with conventional ESG risk questions?
You want to take that, Tom?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thanks, Katsuji, for that one. I think in general, the impact risk dimension, it does tend to overlap with some of the questions that investors are asking related to ESG risk. Just thinking about how material financial risk can sometimes go hand in hand with whether or not you're going to achieve your desired impact. One of the things that we recommend in the guide is that impact investors seek to kind of bridge the divide between their traditional ESG assessments, including around risk, alongside kind of their impact assessments. And so I think one of the nice things about some of the ESG risk questions is that they do kind of create an opening or a pathway to maybe be asking some broader questions around impact. And so IRIS Plus, some of the core metric sets do kind of dive into indicators that do relate back to ESG risk, but by no means are they, I think, comprehensive in terms of the types of questions that investors would want to be asking. So when you think about utilizing IRIS Plus in the core metric sets, that's kind of one good source for input into your impact DDQ. You should also be utilizing the questions that you are typically assessing related to ESG risk, as well as other questions that maybe are a little more specific related to impact that go beyond what's in the core metric set. So you can kind of think of the core metric set as a jumping off point for informing your due diligence questionnaires.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. Yeah, and I was going to also add to that. So, and I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and go into the system and show you where we mentioned, where to find the guide, and also what Tom is pointing to. The IRIS Plus system, the core metric sets have the 5 dimensions, but then also we added another dimension or another element that we call how is change happening, to incorporate a lot of other elements, particularly either to ESG practices or details of the product or service. Now that when we were developing IRIS Plus was coming as very strong feedback from investors and enterprises involved, saying, there are other elements that might not fit into the 5 dimensions, but that we need to look at either when, when you're doing due diligence or throughout the investment management process. And so some of these are covered in there, but again, yes, it's not comprehensive of all ESG topics, but you will find some of those there. So I'm going to share my screen, and let me see. Can you all see the browser now? Yes. Okay. Excellent. So if you go to Iris Plus and you have created your account and some profiles in there, this is the example of financial health that we were looking at before. And so as you can see here on the left-hand side, you have several tabs. So, the overview is where you'll find all the research with statistics, for example, and information about, what is the size of the problem, who is typically affected and whatnot. That can be helpful also during due diligence, especially if it's a new area of investment. The evidence base is this next tab. So, for example, in what we were just reviewing, we were looking at increased savings as the outcome specific that was being targeted by this investment. And here's where you can see all the different field and academic studies that exist, as well as how rigorous these studies are. You can see the rigor by the NESTA standards of evidence, the ranking here with a number of stars on the right-hand side. The next tab is the core metric set. So here, this is some of the snapshots that we're showing, and they're also in the guide. And what I want to stop here in a second and show, this is where you see, why are we collecting this data? What is the insight that this indicator will give me? What are the specific standardized metrics that I need to calculate it? And as I was mentioning before, you have your step-by-step calculation guidance to ensure that all the data is gathered in a way that is clear and is consistent and leads to comparisons. And so here we can see also we have contribution and risk, which we didn't cover in the example just for the sake of time, so that we could have more time for discussion. But this is the other section called How is Change Happening? So here you'll have other elements that are not covered above, for example, looking at client repayment capacity or your Part 30, and you can also add any other indicator in here that is not in here. Here's where you can customize your core metric set. So if there's anything, any ESG related metrics or other metrics that are not in core metric sets, you can add them and save them, and the system will save them for you. And then the next tab, here's where you have guidance. So here, oops, sorry. This guidance tab is where we have all the guidance that we have to date. And you can find here, for example, the Iris Plus for impact due diligence, and you can download it from there. I know we have a few more minutes, and we're getting some more questions. Let me go into that. It says, would be helpful if you could share a link to your presentation for us. Oh yes, so of course we are sharing, we will be posting the recording and the slides of this webinar later on our page. And Laura, I see a message to you. You got me to me too early because I was going to mention that as we go into what's next, but I do want to acknowledge that the work on financial inclusion was done in collaboration with SPTF, the Social Performance Task Force, and their Social Investor Working Group. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, when I mentioned different partners that have worked with us in education and sustainable forestry, SPTF was our partner in financial inclusion, and all the core metric sets and the evidence base, and then the research, and as well as the resources that we have here, which are third-party resources that are recommended for this, all came from that work. And also some people have asked or wonder, how often do we update this? And so in terms of, the evidence base or resources, we have an open call to anybody who either knows of a new tool that we need to consider, or if you come across another evidence piece that you think is very relevant, please do send it to us, and we'll look forward to maintaining this on an updated basis. I'm going to just go back to the slides to wrap it up, but if you have any other questions, feel free to use this time. Okay, there we go. And so in terms of next steps, at Iris Plus, we're going to continue to work on guidance on areas that we identify as of specific need to you. So also if you are struggling with any specific area of IMM and you'd like some guidance provided on this, definitely let us know. Some of the guidance pieces we work on internally, and some others, like this example on impact due diligence, we partner with PCV. We also partnered with CDC Group for data collection. We had a webinar last week with them. So this is something we'll continue to do on an ongoing basis, as well as continue to engage with this working group and offer webinars and workshops to exchange on lessons of practice and whatnot. We're also excited to be launching soon the development of quality jobs in climate change mitigation. More information on that will be coming soon. And we'll also be uploading into Iris Plus very soon the WASH theme. And so as we said, this is an ongoing development, and we're grateful to be working with so many of you on this, and we look forward to much more to come. So if you are not yet involved in the Iris Plus World Working Groups, or would like to offer your expertise for specific areas that we'll be developing, I'll go back to the slide with the themes and the schedule. And also this is all, you can find this schedule in our website as well, just to know what's coming and when. Please shoot us an email and let us know. This is a very collaborative process, and we look forward to working with anybody who's interested in partnering with us. With that, if we don't have any more, we do have one more question. Okay, we'll do one more question and then I'll wrap it up. From Parth, while due diligence, sometimes there are numerous outcome indicators for a particular company through which impact can be mapped, which goes into answering how much change has been created. How do you communicate with the entrepreneurs or companies without overwhelming the asks for data points? PCV team, any thoughts on how to communicate with the potential investee about the data you want to gather without overwhelming them?
I mean, this is, a fundamental challenge within the field of IMM, right? Balancing rigor with practicality, and I think you have to understand how much information do you need to make a decision, and how much information do these entrepreneurs actually want? Are they mission-driven enterprises? Is the data going to actually help them inform their strategies? Or maybe they're not actually mission-driven, and sort of all the information you're collecting is not actually particularly relevant to them. They just happen to be working in an area that generates positive impact in line with your goals. So I think there's not a clear answer here, but it depends on sort of the enterprise's desire for the information, as well as their ability to provide it to you. That should inform to what, sort of how much you're collecting and how much you're actually sharing back to them.
And then also, if I may add on that, I think also that's the, one of our intents, with Iris Plus and the core metric sets, the more that investors adopt the same common metrics and ask for those, the less of a reporting burden that there is on the investees or potential investees. So if if an enterprise has several different investors and they're all asking for pretty much the same type of indicators and metrics, that reduces the requirements on their side quite a bit. So there's plenty of benefits for aligning around common indicators, from the reducing the reporting burden on the investees, to having data that is comparable, to having more quality data. And so these are also some of the reasons why we believe strongly on these, and also know that as we mentioned before throughout the example, there are of course other indicators or metrics that might be specifically important to an investor or an enterprise, and those are added to the core metric sets. But starting from a base of common questions and indicators and metrics, that really helps reduce the asks to the investee.
And I'll just add quickly, Leticia, I think those are great points. I mean, I think one of the pieces here around doing impact due diligence and kind of posing different questions to potential investees is really thinking through what are your different touch points with investees, and at what stages do you try to gather answers to the questions that you want to ask, and to what extent can those questions maybe be done in early conversations, or when you're maybe deeper into the due diligence process as part of maybe survey questions that you're administering to a potential investee. So I think it's important to kind of keep the investee experience kind of front and center as you're thinking about how you're going to go about gathering the data and information you need as part of your due diligence efforts.
Exactly. Wonderful. Well, conscious of time, that we're 1 minute past the hour, I want to thank everybody who joined us today, but a specific thanks to Daniel and Tom at Pacific Community Ventures, who contributed a lot of their knowledge into the how-to piece that we have and that we're able to offer now to you all. So thank you both for all the work that went into the due diligence how-to piece and also this webinar. We will be posting both the slides and the recording on our website later today, and the guidance piece is already available online. Thank you, everybody.